Could Volodymyr Zelensky really be replaced in the middle of a war? He's facing a challenge from a young rival who was once a longtime ally and, in fact, Zelensky's former defense minister, a guy by the name of Fedorov. Fedorov says corruption is holding Ukraine back from winning the war and is calling for an election now for the first time in over 7 years.
Демократія не може бути заручницею Росії.
Over the weekend, Zelensky responded and said that wartime elections would be a huge risk, a quote, tsunami that would split Ukraine. On top of all this, there are reports that Fedorov could be visiting the United States soon. So, where could all this lead? From the BBC, I'm Asma Khalid in Washington, D.C. And welcome to The Global Story on YouTube, our show about where the world and America meet.
My name is Vitaly Shevchenko, and I'm Chief Analyst at BBC Monitoring.
Vitaly, we really appreciate you joining us on The Global Story. We should mention to listeners that you don't just cover this war. You are Ukrainian, and it has affected you personally. You wrote, in fact, an article for the BBC last year where you wrote that there were literally Russian soldiers living in your childhood home in Ukraine, which is wild.
It is wild. It is my understanding that they're using my childhood home in a tiny village called Verkhnya Krynytsia in Zaporizhia region. Basically, there's a new road that appeared leading straight into that house. And with help from my colleagues from BBC Verifiable, looks at some satellite images, and we think nobody else can be using that house but Russian soldiers.
Well, Vitaly, we want to talk today about the dynamics inside of Ukraine. It has now been about 4.5 years since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began in February of 2022. And during this entire time, we have seen one man in charge of Ukraine, and that is President Volodymyr Zelensky. He has been Ukraine's leader. From the outside, from the West, I would say he is largely, not unanimously, but largely seen as a unifying sort of war hero, almost a Churchillian figure. But our understanding is now there are some calls for him to hold an election and potentially be replaced, which obviously could have a huge impact on the war and on Ukraine's relationship with the United States. And those calls, we understand, are coming from someone who used to work for Zelensky. Can you tell us who that is? Where did he come from? And what was his story before this argument began?
Mykhailo Fedorov, the former Ukrainian defense minister, and formerly he was an advisor to Zelensky even before he became president. And Asma, there's more in common between Fedorov and myself than you probably think. He's basically a neighbor. He is from a town that is right next to my home village, a town called Vasilivka, very kind of sleepy, agricultural, and it's famous for kind of a mock castle built by a Russian aristocrat. I'll show you a booklet. This is what it's like. This is from Fedorov's hometown, Vasilivka.
Yeah.
We went to the same university in Zaporizhia. So
different years, though, Vitaly, we should specify.
Yes.
Not to age you, sorry.
He's slightly younger.
He is, remind us, he's in his 30s.
That's right. But when he became Minister of Innovation, I think he was the youngest ever minister. He was 28 when he became minister. And when you think Fedorov, think digital. He was active in Zaporizhia as a student, as an activist, and that caught Volodymyr Zelensky's attention before he was elected. And Fedorov was his advisor for all things digital during the election campaign.
So they've known each other for years. They've been quite close. Mm-hmm.
It could be argued that Fedorov is very firmly a Zelensky man. His most recent government job was defense minister when he was just 35. So when he became defense minister, one popular trend of thought was, what does he know about military? He's all about, digital apps and platforms.
Hmm.
Turns out he knows a lot about digital, and one thing he did, he spearheaded this massive drive to use more drones, long range, winged, kind of plane like drones hitting targets thousands of kilometers inside Russia, FPV, first person view drones hitting Russian logistics in occupied parts of Ukraine, ground based drones delivering supplies, evacuating wounded soldiers. That all shot up to prominence on his watch. And that was all going so well. I remember seeing talk of if this is so successful, we might get Crimea back. There was very hushed murmurings of a possible breakthrough and success.
Mm.
It was widely reported that because of his digital prowess and reputation, he could get in touch with Elon Musk just like that. So he had called Elon Musk to ask Elon Musk to stop the Russians from using Starlink, this highly effective and difficult to jam satellite communication system. Because Russian drones could no longer use Starlink, Ukraine started to make what seemed to be very important advances. So that's just one example of how important and influential Fedorov was.
Hmm.
And then he was sacked. So that's what surprised and outraged a lot of people.
How did he end up on the outside? Um, Not with Zelensky. It's a man you describe as being loyal to Zelensky for many, many years. He's sacked, and now we hear him calling for elections against Zelensky.
That's the question millions of Ukrainians were asking. It all happened last month, and it was all very abrupt. So Zelensky said Fedorov just couldn't get on with Alexander Syrsky, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian army, or the two men. He didn't single out Fedorov. He said, look, the commander-in-chief and the defense minister, they wouldn't sit down and talk unless the president was in the room. This is wrong. I need people who work together, not against each other.
Я просто показую, якщо сторони не можуть вирішити питання, прийдеться вирішувати мені.
And describe the commander-in-chief to us. He was presumably a much older man. I've just heard him described as a bit of a traditional army chief.
Fedorov and Syrsky, they kind of come from a completely different ends of the political and military spectrum, if you like. Alexander Syrsky is more traditional, you're right. He's more about bricks and mortar. He's more about the kind of boring but necessary things that the military needs. Guns and artillery and petrol and whatever, diesel. And that's why the kind of the younger part of the Ukrainian public, they were a lot more inclined to like and support Fedorov because he was more like them. He knows everything about apps and Elon Musk and all that. We want him. He's more relatable to us.
So these two men, the traditional army chief, let's say for shorthand, and the young, innovative defense minister, they are just at odds. They don't get along. And you're saying Zelensky says that they're not even really talking to each other. So Zelensky decides to fire the young defense minister, Fedorov. What did Fedorov say about that? And what was the response in Ukraine?
He basically accused the commander-in-chief, Alexander Syrsky, of stalling reform, of not supporting his initiatives. And he was really critical of him. And protests erupted across Ukraine. And that's a very unusual thing because, it's a wartime country and there's an understanding and you can say a consensus that you don't just rally for no reason at all. You need to, rocking the boat isn't necessarily a good thing when you're being bombed. So when protests erupted last month, they were unusual. They attracted a lot of mostly young people who have held their kind of trademark, crudely made posters made on cardboard. And those posters, they not only demanded Mykhailo Fedorov's reinstatement as defense minister, but also the dismissal of Alexander Syrsky, the commander-in-chief. They just didn't like him. Alexander Syrsky's response was that, well, look, I like drones too. I know drones as well. I've been using them, so don't portray me as this kind of stodgy, old-fashioned, Soviet-trained commander. I agree, we need drones.
Okay, so Fedorov is on the outside. He is upset. He has been, you say, publicly voicing criticism. There are protests in the street. And then it appears the plot thickens. And I hear that the traditional army's chief is also fired. How did that happen, Vitaly?
I see that dismissal as Zelensky's concession to the protesters. This is what they were demanding as well.
Oh.
And they wanted a specific man called Mykhailo Fedorov to become commander-in-chief. So Zelensky said, okay, I've heard you. I'm replacing Syrsky with the man you want.
Vitaly, this seems like an extraordinary amount of chaos in the defense operation and organization of a country that is fighting a war. Has this all affected Ukraine's ability to actually prosecute the war itself, to fight?
It's not a good thing if there's a game of musical chairs happening among the top brass. I've not seen any obvious signs of, Fedorov is gone and the defense lines are collapsing. And the worst thing, I think, from the Ukrainian point of view is trust, any impact on trust, because so many people are sacrificing their lives, donating their money, spend months and months on the front lines in awful conditions or away from the front lines being bombed. And to continue doing that, they have to trust the people at the top. If that trust stops, potentially, it hasn't happened yet, but potentially this might have an impact on how willing Ukrainians are to continue sacrificing their everything. So that, I think, is what a lot of people have been worried about. Divisions, possible divisions.
Speaking of divisions, we have seen Fedorov become an increasingly vocal critic of Zelensky. And just last week, he released this bombshell 9-minute video. And Vitaly, I would appreciate you walking us through what he actually said, because there's a lot he seems to say.
The key takeaway for most observers, I think, is that Fedorov, unexpectedly and very unusually for a key Ukrainian figure, has called for elections to be held in Ukraine. He said, we should not allow the Kremlin to decide when we hold elections.
When he says that we shouldn't let the Kremlin determine when elections happen, he is alluding to the fact that, according to Ukrainian law, elections can only happen when the war ends. And presumably, the war ending is dependent on when Moscow, in part, decides it wants to end this war.
That exactly what his reasoning is, and also he had more general criticisms of the system of governance in Ukraine. And he spoke about corruption. Corruption allegations have never been far away from the center of power in Ukraine. You can call it Soviet or post-Soviet legacy, but it exists. It's undeniable that there are signs of corruption within the Ukrainian government and the Ukrainian military, possibly. Ukraine's been gradually getting better. If you look at reputable rankings, such as the Corruption Perceptions Index compiled by Transparency International, Ukraine's getting better, but it's still there. That is undeniable.
And this issue predates Zelensky, to be clear.
Absolutely. Corruption's been there for years and years and years. And I have to say, I've not really seen massively damaging, credible accusations of corruption by Zelensky himself.
Okay.
One head of Zelensky's office had to go amid all sort of allegations of corruption swirling. Volodymyr Zelensky has said or indicated on numerous occasions that he is determined to stamp out corruption. And one key reason for that is because if there's a feeling among Western donors to Ukraine, if they feel that that money is being embezzled, if it ends up in the pockets of corrupt politicians, that money is just going to stop flowing to Ukraine, which means that Ukraine, well, will find all but impossible to continue fighting Russia without Western assistance.
What are people referring to in Ukraine when they speak of corruption?
Money for the war, it's not very often that you hear about it being embezzled. It happens. There have been claims that, particularly the building of defense structures in the East, some of the money was embezzled. But this latest case that emerged this week, it involves former and current members of parliament and somebody from the president's office who were apparently discussing how to launder, i.e. legalize more than $3 million in money so that it can be used as bail for a former minister who is already behind bars. So that's what annoys a lot of people in Ukraine, particularly various volunteers who donate their own money and raise funds donated by others. One of them said, well, look, we're struggling to find money to buy drones. And there's this people with basically bags of cash, millions of dollars, just like that, laughingly discussing how to bail someone out who we think is corrupt, when it's literally a matter of life and death for your country, your nation, yourself personally, finding the money to protect you, your nation, your country. It just sounds extremely outrageous.
Well, what has Zelensky said or done at all in response to Fedorov's criticism in that bombshell video we referred to?
Somebody from his office spoke to the BBC and offered a sort of a tongue-in-cheek response. Well, how are they going to hold elections when they're being bombed? I'd like to see that. So that is very indicative of this kind of consensus within Ukraine that, well, look, this is not happening. No other key politician or figure or potential rival of Zelensky is calling for an election right now. The latest opinion poll I saw suggested that a mere 15% of Ukrainians agree that an election should be held right now before a ceasefire, before the war ends, whatever.
Okay.
Then there are more practical reasons. Members of the military, how are they going to vote? How are they going to run if they choose to run in those elections? If they are stuck in the trenches and have been stuck in the trenches for months, if not years, what about the millions of Ukrainians who are now refugees scattered across the globe? What about occupied parts of Ukraine? How are Ukrainians going to vote there if they're literally being forced to take Russian passports, if not killed? And the list goes on and on. There are unsurmountable practicalities. And of course, one reason why the UK, for example, didn't hold a general election until Germany's defeat in the Second World War were considerations of safety. If a lot of Ukrainians are queuing to vote, they obviously become a target for Russia's so-called human safari. And also, Russia is really good at manipulating elections. And I have no doubt whatsoever, that's what they would like to do. If, theoretically speaking, Ukraine holds an election, Russia gets involved, supports a puppet candidate who eventually wins, becomes head of government, head of state in Ukraine, Ukrainian president, that's it. They no longer need to wage war against Ukraine. You can wage war, or you can install a puppet government through elections. If this happens, works for Putin.
Well, Vitaly, you mentioned earlier that calls for election are not really routine. They are not really popular from within Ukraine. But we have heard these calls for an election from Russia's Vladimir Putin. We have heard them in the past, in fact, even from the President of the United States, from Donald Trump.
And I do say, at what point, when do they have an election in Ukraine?
The relationship between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky has been rocky, to put it mildly. It ebbs and flows. I would say that at this point they seem to be on better speaking terms. I think the relationship has certainly improved by most accounts. Nonetheless, I'm curious where you see all of this Fedorov criticism leaving Zelensky. I mean, could it rekindle some of the criticism that we have heard from parts of the MAGA base about the idea that Zelensky is corrupt or that he's a dictator? Words that we've in fact heard from the president himself use in the past.
Possibly. Depends on what Donald Trump sees, I guess. I tend to see what Fedorov said and did as an inconvenience for Zelensky, an obstacle, rather than a massive challenge that will somehow push Zelensky's rule to the brink of collapse. Mykhailo Fedorov just does not have the political weight to force an election or to oust Volodymyr Zelensky, because whatever Ukrainians or top Ukrainian politicians think of Volodymyr Zelensky, they agree that holding an election right now or somehow reshuffling the very, very top echelons of power is going to be not just practically difficult, but it's also going to be a gift to Russia. It will cause division. It will give Russia a chance to manipulate elections. And that's why Mykhailo Fedorov, from this point of view, is alone. With the exception of, there are all sorts of people among his supporters, but within the political mainstream in Ukraine, he is alone.
We've seen reporting in Reuters indicating that a source close to Fedorov says that he plans to visit the United States very soon. How could this all change the relationship between Ukraine and the U.S. and between Zelensky and the Trump administration more specifically, which, as we have indicated, has been volatile at times?
I guess another way of asking that question is, what happens if Trump says, I want Fedorov, not Zelensky? That will change a lot of things.
Really?
But will that work? I really don't think so, because looking at the dynamics of popular opinion within Ukraine, starting, for example, with that tumultuous meeting, encounter between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky at the Oval Office, every time Donald Trump says or does something that can be seen as an insult to Volodymyr Zelensky or an attack on him, that is interpreted in Ukraine as an attack on Ukraine, on the Ukrainian nation, and it sends support for Volodymyr Zelensky surging. So if Mykhailo Fedorov were to go to the States and very publicly be supported by, I don't know, J.D. Vance, Donald Trump, whoever.
Or Elon Musk. You mentioned in the past that he was somebody who had the relationship with Musk, that he could pick up the phone and call him.
Absolutely. I don't think that would particularly endear him to the Ukrainians. of course, if he comes back with some practical results, for example, one thing he's been pushing for is allowing Ukraine to use Starlink to strike targets within Russia. And apparently Elon Musk told Fedorov, no, I'm not doing that. If that changes, maybe he will become more popular because he'll say, you know what, I've done this. If we use Starlink to hit the launch sites of ballistic missiles, the deadliest weapon Russia has at the moment, if that stops ballistic missiles raining down on Kyiv, yeah, I think Ukrainians will start liking Fedorov even more. But Ukrainians have heard so many empty words coming from so many capitals, including Washington, that if Fedorov says, oh, Donald Trump likes me, or Elon Musk likes me, or J.D. Vance says I'm a good guy, that's just not going to be enough.
Well, Vitaly, thank you for joining us on The Global Story. It's always our pleasure when you come in and spend some time with us.
Thank you very much.
After I wrapped up my conversation with Vitaly, our BBC colleague Dan Johnson actually sat down with Fedorov for an interview, and the former defense minister said Zelensky has questions to answer about corruption.
I think that probably you better ask the president about this. Do an interview with him, have a conversation with him in front of the world.
На увесь
Do you
світ.
think he has questions to answer?
Я думаю, що готовий, чому ні.
I believe that he is ready. Why not? That's his responsibility to explain whether he was aware of all that or not.
And that's it for The Global Story on YouTube today. Thanks, as always, for spending some time with us. If you appreciated our show today, then I should recommend checking us out as an audio podcast. That's right, we're available every weekday with new episodes on bbc.com or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.